Good morning. Morning. That's crazy. That shows how tired I am. Um, Good evening. Welcome. We're back. Um, Today's reading was Job 35 to 37. Let's jump right straight in. So we met Elihu, yesterday, and he came in and sort of rebuked Job's friends and Job and began his argument from a different point of view. He began with sort of exalting God, with recognizing that God is good and sort of going from that viewpoint, and he carries on as such. So he challenges Job and actually quotes Job. He opens 35 with, "Do you think it is right for you to claim I am righteous before God?" Or for you to ask, what's in it for me? What's the use of living a righteous life? And sort of I had to go back and check, and I said he says that in Job 9 and in other places. But I had to go back and check that Job actually said that. And I remember as I was reading it, when I was reading it back then, it sounded and was a desperate man making a desperate claim, having lived the way he lived, to be going through what he was going through. It's not actually that far fetched to think you might ask, "What's in it for me?" I get a speeding ticket. I got a speeding ticket for doing a 24 in London, 24 miles per hour in London. Um, and I was so incensed by it because, I've been driving for 14, 15 years now. Um, and the only other time I got a speeding ticket was rushing my wife to the hospital. So it's like all this time of driving well, I get the speeding ticket and I'm like, oh, this is points on my license. This is £100 fine now. This is a increase on my insurance. And I'm like, what's the point? What's the point of even abiding by the rules? You know, and that's just for a speeding license for actually speeding. So I'm rightly getting that. But I can relate to the idea of feeling like there's no point to it. Like, what's the point of being good? You know? And Job said as much earlier on. But Elihu pulls him up on this and is like, do you think that's right for you to ask God that? And goes on to sort of set up this idea of, actually, God doesn't owe us anything for being good. He doesn't owe us anything for being righteous. And then Elihu takes that a bit further and even goes, if even if you sin, how does that affect God? And you kind of have to wonder about it. It's like your sin doesn't stop God from being God, you know? So I think it's Jay-Z or Kanye West was like, you know, um what's a God to an unbeliever? Right. And I think it was Bizzle that responded, or one of these Christian rappers, like, he's still God. He is God, you know. And I think Elihu's sort of pointing out that, yes, you're in great anguish. Yes, you are suffering, but you still can't just talk to God as if he's your peer. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes. Yes, he is our Father. Yes, he is, undescribably merciful, but he's still God. And there's an element of respect when you're speaking to someone that's so far above your station that needs to remain in place, even if you're in anguish. So God doesn't hold us to it as much. We cry out and we say silly things. And, sometimes I hear prayers and it's like we're instructing God to do something. Sometimes I even catch myself and I'm like, God, heal this, or I command this to go and stuff. And God has given us the power to do so, yes. But sometimes, like, if you just actually sit back and listen, it's like, are you instructing God to do something for you? Are you demanding this of God? Do you have the ability to do so? And who pulls Job up on this. It's like, yeah, you're in pain, but you don't. That doesn't warrant disrespect. That doesn't warrant not recognizing who you're speaking to. And I think Job demonstrated sort of moments of lucidity where, he would say, I will argue my case in front of God. And then the next verse is like, but who can argue their case in front of God? Who can, challenge God? And so I think he knew that, but in his anguish was also speaking out of turn sometimes. And then Elihu points him out on it. And, ultimately saying, "You are talking nonsense, Job. You have spoken like a fool." At the end of chapter 35, and you know, Job was saying things out of his pain that weren't true. He was saying God does not respond uh, to sinners with anger and is not concerned with wickedness. In his suffering, he said that. In his friends piling onto his suffering, he said some of these things. So it's not justified, but it's understandable. And yet, Elihu, I think, actually correctly points out that that's nonsense. Of course, God cares about wickedness. Of course, God responds to sinners and deals with sin. Um, where your anguish is understandable, that does not give you right to speak to God in this manner. And in this way, I think Elihu's being a better representative of, at the very least, one who knows God than Job's friends have been, and actually to some extent than Job, as all things considered. You know, and Elihu continues. He continues with, um, again, elevating God and reminding Job of who God is, of how great He is, of how understanding He is, how He does not despise anyone. Job said verbatim, God hates him, but Elihu is pointing out, no, God doesn't hate anyone. He doesn't hate you. You know, um, justice will always prevail. There will always, in the long in the grand scheme of things, justice will always be meted out. And so, where you are suffering, where you are undergoing some adversity, maybe God is saving you from something. And I think he says as much. In Job 36:16, he says, God is, let me go from even 15. But by means of their suffering, he rescues those who suffer, for he gets their attention through adversity. I was listening to the first preach from 2819, Philip Anthony, I think Mitchell, or one, yeah, the 2819 pastor. He gave his first preach of the year. Um, and he was talking about how sometimes God will hurt you to get your attention. And it makes complete sense to me. You might have watched like some of these shows, and sitcoms use this to great comedic effect, where the person's like panicking and like going crazy, and like one of their friends will just slap him to get his attention. And like, slap, get your attention. I think what's it? New Girl uses that as well. One of the characters is like going off on one, and the other character just like gives him a quick punch to the tummy. It's like, all right, you okay? And it's like, yeah, I'm okay, and then move on. But this idea of sometimes having to stop someone, cause pain to someone to get their attention, it makes sense. 2819 was talking about, um, I think it was Israel. Israel. So he was preaching about fasting, and he was talking about how Israel, God had sent locusts to ravage Israel's crop, and in that famine, in that sort of that blow to their economy, their minds were brought to the fact that they had abandoned God's purposes, and they fasted. And that was the point he was making. But this idea of sometimes God bringing a certain adversity, not to kill you, not to destroy you, but rather to get your attention. And then in Job 36:16, Elihu goes on to say, God is leading you away from danger, Job, to put a place free from distress. He is setting your table with the best food, but you are obsessed with whether the godless will be judged. In Job's anguish and going through this adversity, that's all he can focus on, is how unfair it is to him. And to the reader, it appears as such. But when we think of, and we should be thinking of, how first and foremost, God is good, the embodiment of all things good. He would not cause pain on his child unless for a given reason, unless for a good reason. Um, And Elihu's pointing this out to Job, and we go back to the fact that it was God that recommended Job up to the enemy, um, for this testing. You know, God understanding all the things the enemy meant for evil to cause Job to curse God, God was using for good. Um, and lastly, um, Elihu goes on to remind Job of God's power. You know that God, he mentions all these things. God commands the rain where to fall and guides the lightning. Um, and so reminding Job of very much the fact that God isn't one um, to be angry at or disrespectful of, but one to show fear and reverence because of how powerful he is. Pastor Lyle just pointed out Elihu was right in some aspect of saying, who can talk together anyhow? But he was saying the same thing that Job's friend said before. He was also not respectful in the way that he talked to Job. Young man, yeah, yes. He does what he does. He does, I mean, he says Job has spoken like a fool. And in as much as he opens with respect and saying he lets the elders speak, he also was a bit disrespectful in the way he was going. That's very true. Um, by his own admission, he was the youngest one there. Sorry. So yeah, in 37, he reminds Job of God's being powerful. So far, Elihu's been at least the one to sort of, I think, come from a good point in that he is talking about God and God being great and God being good, um, and God maybe having a reason for what's going on. But again, he also, as Pastor Lars pointed out, is also repeating some of the things that the friends have said, in as much as he's coming at it from a different point of view. Um, and he's also speaking very disrespectfully sometimes to Job and to his friends. But that's what where it ends in Job 37, and we're coming close to the end of Job, so we're going to hear from God soon. Um, I think we've got so tomorrow's reading is Job 38 to 39. After which I think we will just have um, we'll pretty much have the culmination of what happens afterwards. Yeah, after that we've just got three more verses, so we see what happens afterwards with Job once once God comes in. Yeah, God's response is definitely going to be interesting. So cool. This was a nice quick one. I'll round up here. As always, I hope that this encourages someone to pick up their Bible whenever you watch this. Thank you, Pastor Lyle, for your contributions as well, and for jumping on. I think every single day, as we spend time in the Word, we will see His Word change us. I'm being reminded of so much in the story of Job, and also seeing Christ in the story of Job, and seeing how God is. He is Father, but He's also Lord. I think is so great. So I think there's lots to be gained from spending some time in the Word. So I hope that this encourages you to do so. But until tomorrow, God willing, have a good evening. Peace.